Hello everyone, welcome back to our TOEFL iBT speaking series. This is video 8. We will be talking about some useful answer templates that you can use during the exam. You can start to memorize and use them.
Okay, so today in this video we will spend some time talking about each of the tasks, and I will be offering you all some answer templates on two levels. First, we will talk about how to answer each task, an outline template, and then I will go into some specific sentence templates for each of the sections for the 6 tasks, and hopefully by the end of this video you will have a very good idea about what you can say, what you can expect, and how you can practice. So in the past few videos we've talked a lot about how to prepare for the different tasks, what to expect, how to practice for them, how to take notes. I hope it all comes together here toward the end and that you can have a template to follow. You don't have to use these templates, of course, but it's a good idea to enter into them with an idea of what you can use and some variations. These won't fit all of the questions all the time. It takes some practice, and of course it takes some luck. But I hope that ultimately you can build from here. And remember that a good part of the TOEFL speaking section, and actually all assessment tests in general, a very good part of it is understanding what you will be tested upon. So take some time to practice these things and you will certainly, definitely be able to improve your score. Let's start from task 1. So the task 1 will always be about an open choice. You'll get a chance. So state your main point first, and then most importantly, use a transition before you start your supporting details. Give your first reason, give your second reason, and then conclude by restating your point. This is the best way to approach task 1, in my opinion. Probably the most important thing is remember to transition, and remember that you are allowed to restate and conclude. Okay, so for example, you can state your main point by saying, in my opinion. Let me give you some suggestions. For instance, in my opinion, the best movie ever is, etc. Or I believe that my favorite film is, etc. And just state your main point openly at the very beginning. I've stressed this in previous videos. I'll stress it again. Don't build up toward it. Start from your main point. So my favorite film is, my favorite movie is, my favorite place to visit, my favorite city, whatever. Or sometimes if you could be someone, who would you be, etc. There are different kinds of questions here in task 1. Choose one and practice different possibilities. Okay, so these should help you build the first sentence. And then transition. When you transition, say, I believe this for 2 reasons, or I have 2 reasons, or I believe or think or feel about this, etc. Or I believe this way for 2 reasons, etc. Different ways. But make sure you have this transition built into your response, because it can give you a moment to prepare your thoughts, but also it highlights that you know where you're headed. Okay, so of course when you're stating your reasons, say things like first and then second, specifically, or for example, right? There are different ways to do this, but these 4 should get you a long way. So first, I love the city because, for example, my favorite character in the film, etc., etc. Very good ways to open the parts where you give your reasons, and just anticipate that you will give 2. Okay, and then finally, conclude by restating your points. So therefore, to conclude, or as such, they can mean essentially the same things. So just build on that, and you will have a successful answer for task 1. Okay, one more. This is why I. All right. So what about task 2? Task 2 is the closed choice. So you will have to choose a preference or choose whether you will agree or disagree. So you'll have limited choice. So state your choice, transition to supporting details, give your first reason, give your second reason, and then conclude. So it's very similar to task 1, except that you will state your choice at the beginning. And let me give you some suggestions as to how to do that. So again, use the same structure that you used for task 1 here for task 2, and change the first part to I agree or I disagree, that or with, etc. I would prefer, because sometimes you get this kind of choice. I think it would be better too. So just change out the first sentence and then build as you go along. This is a very good way, I think, to grab your attention and a good way to memorize this template. Okay, so remember that it shouldn't be exactly the same, but task 1 and task 2 build on the same resources, the same reasoning. So for example, you can say, considering both the pros and cons of, an advantage would be, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. I'm giving you some variations here. Another would be, is a way to approach the structure here. There are different ways depending on the question. So the best thing that you can do here, I think, is to practice as many different kinds of questions as you can and fit in, when you have this kind of question, fit in a certain framework, a certain topic, but know the big structure that you are going to follow. So task 3 is the campus announcement or article or event, and then there will be a conversation. It is an integrated task. So remember, biggest ideas here, the big thing that I want you to remind you of when you are encountering task 3 and task 5 is that you will need to state what you know about the reading first. So you spend a little time, not a lot of time, but at least 2 sentences talking about the reading, and this sequence will help you. When you're taking notes at the beginning, you will know that there will be 2 parts, right? There's a part that relates to the reading, and then there is a part that relates to the speaking, the listening part, where you hear a speaker or speakers talking. So there are 2 big sections that you will need to take notes on. And when you are talking about the readings and the lecture or the conversation, you can just follow what you hear and read. So state the main point, give a reason for the main point. This is very important. So the announcement is that the campus is building a new cafeteria. Why are they doing this? That is part 2. Give a reason. Or they're closing the library at a certain time, whatever. Give a reason why the announcement or the letter or the article or the reading exists. Show some understanding of the rationale behind the reading here in task 3. And then 1 sentence, same, transition to the listening. There are normally 2 reasons depending whether they agree or disagree with the campus policy, the man or the woman, it doesn't really matter. Just remember that there will be 2 reasons and you should be able to summarize them. Finally, give your conclusion by restating the main point or giving a synthesis, a short synopsis, synthesis of what is being said. Okay, so for example, what can you say? According to the reading, according to the letter, according to the announcement, the campus will be home to a new library. We'll be building a new church, or we'll be building a new cafeteria, or there will be renovations, or the parking space will be closing down, whatever, depending on what you see. State the main purpose of the reading. This is because, and then give a rationale. That's the most important thing. Remember, when you're taking notes, that's what you need to take your notes on. There will be some details, but this has to be the main focus. And then the man or woman, because you'll hear the conversation, the man or the woman believes that this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, they support, they don't support, whatever. for two reasons. First, and then second, or additionally, moreover, this is the easy part. But the important thing is that you do the transition carefully and quickly between the reading and the speaking. This is essential to getting it right. And therefore, you can wrap up your discussion. And this is a good way to approach task 3. As you are taking notes, also make use of this template. Make sure that you can get these major details. So what is being announced on campus, the reason it's being announced, and then 2 reasons for agreeing or disagreeing, support or not supporting, for supporting or not supporting the announcement or what is being proposed, and then give a final conclusion. The whole point here in task 3 is your ability to summarize. So keep that in mind as we go on. Okay, task 4, the second integrated task. So it's important to know that here you will encounter a piece of reading and a lecture on the reading. So it will be on one central topic, and that is what you need to outline first. That's what you need to state first. Start by talking about what the topic at stake is, what is on the table, what is being discussed. Okay, and then give a couple of details. This is simply to show that you have read and understood the reading. You can give a definition, or you can give some broad details, a couple of details to support the central topic. And then transition, because this is the major point, right? The important thing is the lecture that follows. So transition to the lecture very quickly, and then give some details of the lecture. Normally, the lecturer, the speaker, the professor will refer to the reading and will follow up on the reading in some important ways, maybe by giving some more illustrations, by giving specific examples, or disagreeing sometimes. But give some details of the lecture, and then finally give a conclusion. Remember, this task is very important because you have to be able to summarize what you read and listen to in a university setting, in an academic setting. And this is a very good way to lay it out. It's actually also, I found it to be a very useful template when you are actually participating in class, when you are in a university setting, an academic setting, in an English-speaking country. For instance, I am in the United States. This is a very good template to follow. Start by saying, okay, so this is what the reading says. I remember some details about the reading. And then you said, or like a classmate said, or a speaker said, you said something and this is what I understood. And then all you have to do is add your opinion or ask a question. This is a very good way to model academic speech. What have you said? What I have learned? My question, my point, my suggestion. And then give a conclusion. I really advocate this kind of practice because, you know, for tasks 3 and 4, as you build along, you really should be able to talk more deeply about different kinds of topics. It's very important to engage in academic conversation, not just to talk about what you like and what you prefer, what you dislike, what you have experienced in the independent tasks, but also to be able to engage in academic conversations or campus conversations for that matter. You'll see a progression. As the tasks become more and more complicated, you will see yourself learning how to speak in a university setting in an English-speaking country. As we move into tasks 5 and 6, it should become even more clear because you will be offering your own opinions, your own suggestions, and you will be able to rely only on listening as we go into task 6. So really do pay attention to this, the points that are being made in the TOEFL speaking section. It's really not just about testing your ability to form a good complete sentence that is grammatically correct. It's also important to show that you are able to organize your thoughts in a way that are useful for others to understand. Okay, so let's take a look at what this looks like in practice. You can say something like, okay, so the topic in the reading and lecture is, so maybe it's colors, or maybe it's a certain kind of animal, maybe it's a certain historical event. There is a lot of variation in what you will encounter. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll find something that is familiar or interesting to you, but if not, you should still be able to understand. So the topic in the reading is, and then give a brief definition or a follow-up detail. The reading tells us to show that you have understood the reading, and the professor or speaker goes into more detail and challenges or disagree. Challenges means to disagree, right? The reading by talking about this, and then give some details. Okay, and then you can conclude at the end. Okay, so task 5. Task 5 is important because there will be two solutions, right? There are two possibilities. Normally there is a problem. There is a dilemma that you need to explore, something that you need to think about, that you need to offer advice for. So it's important to start with a statement of the problem. You move from the objective to the subjective. 从客观到主观. Start from what you understand, but then end with what you believe. This is an important distinguishing point from the previous two tasks. You have to end with your personal preference. You also shouldn't start with your personal preference. It's very easy to remember what you think and then start with how you feel, but you should start by summarizing the problem. We've talked about this in previous weeks, but I want to state it again. Start by summarizing the problem. Transition into the two solutions, the two possibilities, okay, and then state the two possibilities with caveats. That means give two solutions, but know that they are never perfect. It's important to be able to concede that there are pros and cons to any choice. State your own opinion and your own preference, and give two reasons to support your preference and your opinion. I would suggest that you don't concede here. You shouldn't say, oh, of course, there's a con here. There's normally no time. You should state your reasons strongly here in task 5. If you have time, if you talk very fast, you certainly can. But I would suggest pushing forward by giving your two reasons and then end with your conclusion here. So let me repeat. 从客观到主观，从大到小。Start with the problem, start with what is on the page, what you listen to, what you learned, and then move to your interpretation. And this works not just in speaking for the TOEFL, it works in academic settings as well. So it's very good practice. Okay, so let's take a look at some specific sentence templates. So the problem here, or the dilemma that the girl, the man, they are facing, the issue here is, and there are two possibilities, two possible outcomes, two solutions. It doesn't matter. Transition. Note very clearly in your words that you are transitioning into the next part. First, he or she could, with caveats. So concede, however, but this solution is not perfect because. Second, also, he or she could, etc., however, this could happen. And we've given examples before. I've talked about the example that I remember most clearly when I took the test is, so what happens if your flight gets delayed, for instance, before you can fly to your new university? Do you pay more to travel, or do you miss the first day? So he or she could pay more. However, that costs more money and still might not arrive on time. He or she could also just wait for a couple of days. It saves money, but you would lose the first 2 days of orientation, etc. There are different possibilities of how to approach this. Of course, there are different kinds, but there are always two that you can use. Personally, I would, or in my opinion, and then first, give two reasons. Second, note also here that when you take your notes, you should set it up in this way. You should set up the problem and then the two possibilities with the caveats, and then give your choice, circle your choice, and then two reasons, and then therefore, I believe, etc., etc. Okay, so it's a very strong way to start and then transition and then end. Okay, very good way to do this. Okay, that is task 5, and a lot of students have a hard time sometimes choosing what to do. It's simply, I would say, adopt what you do in task 2. Don't hesitate. Just make a choice, make a case, argue for something that you can easily argue for. Don't overthink it here. All right, so what about task 6, the full academic lecture? Okay, so this is probably the hardest task. What I can tell you is that normally it will be separated into 2 large parts. So anticipate that you will have 2 big sections of your notes. Okay, and make sure that you think about this as you are building on your notes. What you will need to do is to state the lecture topic and give one illustrating detail or one interesting supporting detail. So the talk is about, etc., etc., which is, etc., etc. An interesting thing about this topic is, etc., etc. Okay? Summarize the first part. And by doing so, I would ask you to pay attention to what the question is, what is being asked here. Don't go about just simply summarizing, but summarize the points that are being asked. So pay attention to the question, but in general, make sure that you follow what is being said. Follow the lecture model, but at the same time, pay attention to what is being asked of you. Don't simply just summarize. You'll have to do a little bit of it, but you need to think critically and think fast here. My suggestion for you here is really to practice the same lecture over and over again to get a quick grasp, to quickly understand what the structure of the lecture is. Summarize the 2 parts and then give a conclusion. Answer the questions in the process. And this looks very easy, but actually when you're actually doing it, it's kind of difficult. So a template that you can follow is, the talk is about, this is, which is an illustrating detail. First, the speaker talks about, etc., etc. For example, and this is where you start to answer the questions. Next, the speaker says, etc., etc. For instance, so these are some ways that you can change up your language, but importantly, you have to be able to answer the question directly. And I gave an example previous weeks, and end with in conclusion. It's important to be able to do this in real life as well. When a classmate asks you, okay, so what did the professor talk about? What was the lecture about today? You should be able to summarize for yourself, but you should also be able to frame the lecture against questions that you might have in your essays or your exams, or frame questions against what you have read. And so this is good practice. And task 6 is particularly difficult because there are different ways of lecturing. I can only tell you that there are 2 main parts for each question, for each task 6. And the questions differ as well. There's a lot of variation. But the best way to do it is to start and then transition and then go into the 2 parts and then end in conclusion. This has been a bit of a longer video, but I hope that in this way we have reviewed the essentials of the 6 tasks, the independent and integrated tasks, the integrated tasks that involve reading and the ones that don't. Remember that you will need to use these skills truly in an academic setting. If you use the TOEFL to apply for graduate school or to be an exchange student in an English-speaking setting, it's important that these tools that you have are built into your rhetoric, your repertoire, and you are able to pull them out and they become second nature to you. My suggestion here, of course, is to memorize, but also to leave enough room for variation. memorize the larger structures, the outline templates, but also memorize some small structures, some smaller details, the specific sentence templates. In general, remember 3 things. Number 1, go from the general to the specific. 从大说到小. Okay, go from the go from the objective to the subjective. 从客观到主观. And third, remember to use transitions and details. Okay, and hopefully with enough practice, spend some time every day. Practice. You will know what to expect in the speaking section, and nothing will come as too much of a surprise. Okay, so see you all in the next part. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for watching this video. In the next video, we will continue talking about some useful answer templates, so stay tuned.